Alexa, what is the tightening torque for SRAM Revel chainring bolts?
From Fixia.com. Torque all bolts proper sequence to 14 ft-pounds. Then paint mark on the of each bolt. Using mark as a reference, tighten all the bolts proper sequence an additional 90 degrees. Then tighten all bolts in sequence additional 90 degrees.
I don't believe that for a minute. Hello again YouTube, and welcome to my first video of 2023. So in this one I'm going to be fitting a power meter to the On One Freeranger Gravel bike. Now this was just a little bit harder than I imagined it was going to be, and that was all down to actually finding a power meter that would fit it. This particular bike comes with Revel 1GXP group set, and that seems to be very hard to find a power meter for. I went through various options. I think Stages used to make a power meter, so you could go looking for a used one of those, and in fact I did, and there weren't many around. The alternative would be a set of Garmin rally pedals or something like that. To be honest with you, they're quite pricey. And I don't know, I just don't feel good about their chances of longevity given where they are and how they're built and what have you. So after a lot of searching, I came across this. So this is a Sigeyi Axo spider-based power meter. So this replaces your crank spider and takes its power reading directly from the crank. And this seemed to be the best option. Now, I hadn't heard of this company Sigeyi before, but after a little trawl through YouTube, I found that they have been reviewed by GP Lama, and he seemed quite impressed with them. So I gave it a shot. Right, so this is the Sigeyi spider-based power meter. So this is for a SRAM 35110. So that's basically 3 bolts on the crank arm, 5 bolts on the spider, 110 BCD. If you are not sure what your BCD is, I can refer you to one of my videos. I'll put a card up the top there where I've got actually how to figure out the BCD on a 5-bolt setup. It's easy. So being a spider-based meter, it's a little bit more of a palaver to fit than a set of pedals or a crank arm, but let's have a look and see what we got. So there is a charging cable. Now the deal with this is it's magnetic charging, so much like a MacBook or something like that, that sort of magnetic charging deal. Right, what we got here, you can actually tailor the colour of the power meter to your bike, which is rather nice. Double-sided. So there is a user guide in English or whatever language. Installation instructions in English or whatever language. So just to show you the deal with the charging cable. So yeah, look, that should only fit one way, which isn't that way. It must be that way. There you go. So my plan with this is to, between rides, just charge it up on the bike with a power bank. So at the time of purchase, which is basically right up the end of December 2022, this with shipping and everything else was 366 quid. I don't think that's bad, to be fair, for a spider-based power meter. And also, if you compare this, given what I've said about not being able to get a power meter for the Freeranger, the alternative to this is a set of Garmin pedals. They're probably twice the cost, or probably 3 times if you want to go for a double-sided setup. Beyond that, I think you might just be into looking for a used Stages or something like that. I believe Stages did make a single-sided crank arm power meter for this setup. Anyway, enough of talking about it. Let's get it fitted. Fitting is quite straightforward. You begin by just removing the left-hand crank arm, the non-drive crank arm. I've done this in another video. Simply just put an 8mm Allen key into that central bolt and keep winding it out, and it'll pull the arm off for you dead easy. Just give the central shaft a little bit of persuasion, and then you can take the crank out from the other side. So the first thing I did with the crankset on the bench there is to thoroughly clean it and degrease it. I'm using WD-40 here, and I'm using that just as a cleaner and degreaser. In my experience, it's good for cleaning and degreasing. I'm not using this to unseize any of the bolts because, believe me, if you've got a seized bolt, it won't unseize them. The only thing it's really good at unseizing is tubeless tyres. See some of my other videos for that. So with your crankset clean, you need to remove the crank arm from the Spider first. So you've just got 3 Torx T25 bolts. They're not very tight, so just whip those out and keep them in order. With the chain rings off and the Spider still attached to them, I then set about cleaning the mating surface on the crank arm, because don't forget, this is where your power meter is going to sit, so you want that absolutely spotlessly clean before you put your expensive power meter onto it. Removing the Spider is just a case of removing the 5 chainring bolts. Now on this SRAM setup, they're easier to remove than Shimano ones. Shimano ones have the odd little slot on the back and a hex on the other side, and even though I've got the proper park tool to hold them, they're a nightmare to undo. Whereas with this SRAM setup, you've just got a hex key on both sides, slightly bigger on one side. I think one is a 5 and one is a 6. Don't quote me on that. I can't remember actually what sizes I was using. And be careful with the bolts, because the 2 at the bottom kind of fit the other way round to the ones at the top. So you'll find that with the bolts, the 3 bolts at the top, they've got the larger hex on the outside, the smaller hex on the inside. The ones at the bottom have that reversed, so the larger hex on the inside, smaller hex on the outside. It's then just a case of fitting your power meter in place of the Spider. Just make a note of which way the crank arm goes. It's a little bit misleading because on the original setup, the crank arm actually hides one of the bolts, whereas with your power meter setup, all the bolts will be visible. You've got a nice clear indication of where the crank arm will sit, and I just lined it up so it would be as closest to what's called the index bolt at the top. That's the one that's normally hidden by the crank arm. Tighten all your bolts up and torque them correctly. The inner bolts, as you can see it's stamped on the power meter, they tighten to 8 to 9 Newton meters, and after a little bit of a Google search I did establish that the outer chainring bolts also tighten to 9 Newton meters. So you can just take your torque wrench and I'd say just leave it set at 9. So having said that this was a bit more of a palaver to fit, I think I'm probably doing it a bit of a disservice. Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult than a set of pedals or a crank arm, but not hugely more difficult. And as I found with this particular bottom bracket, taking it apart to clean and re-grease it is almost a service item, so you should be hopefully very familiar with how it all comes apart. Okay, so I had my first ride with it this morning, and yeah, the numbers were kind of what I was expecting. Now you've got to bear in mind, I'm not GP Llama, I don't have a Llama lab, I don't have other power meters that I can test this against, so I've not got a lot of ways of quantifying how accurate it is. All I can say is that for me it looks there or thereabouts, maybe under reading just a touch, and that would be consistent with what GP Llama found when he tested it. The good news is that you can simply change that offset using the connected phone app. So it hooks up via Bluetooth, and as you can see here, you can update the firmware, or you could go in and update the power offset, which is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to nudge it up a little bit because I know what my regular power numbers would be for the course that I rode it on this morning. And like I say, I think it was reading just a little bit low. But let's keep perspective on this. You know, I think for me, I'm never really worried about kind of that 0.1% difference in power or something like that, it doesn't make a lot of odds to me. What I want is consistency, and I want to be able to go out and ride a given bike on a given route and check my power numbers and see if I'm improving or see if there are improvements to be made. And I think this will be pretty good at that. One thing I would say, and this is kind of the only criticism I think I would levy against this thing so far, the charging port, that magnetic charging port I showed you up the front of the video, I just worry about that, where it is. It's quite exposed. This is a gravel bike. You know, you've seen what a hard time, in another video, you've seen what a hard time the bottom bracket gets. So I just wonder about the longevity of it. I am making a point after every ride of making sure that that is absolutely spotlessly clean. And I would say that that would be really good practice. When you get back, just clean that thing down with some clean tissue or a clean soft rag, and make sure that it is bone dry before you put the charger onto it. I think if you put the charger onto this wet, you might get what I got with one of my other Garmin devices. I charged it up after a swim, hadn't cleaned the charging ports completely, and one of them kind of plated itself, is the only way I can put it. And I suppose that makes sense. You know, I suppose there's potential for a little bit of electrolysis or something like that to go on if you've not got an absolutely snug and dry fit. So yeah, just a note of caution there. So anyway, thanks for watching this one. Happy New Year to everyone, and I hope 2023 pans out to be exactly what you want it to be. And I'm looking forward to being able to deliver quite a few more videos this year, just trying to get my head back in the space. Thanks, YouTube.